I was going to say that obviously most people across the political spectrum were not happy about Charlie Kirk's passing. There was a very vocal and sizable minority on the left that were, and that spurred cancellation of them, a sustained effort from the right, the first time it's happened that I know of, wherein people
Yes.
used the methods of cancel culture against those who were very glad to see their opponents get canceled, to be economically destroyed, and to
Yes.
be socially unpersoned, essentially. So that was definitely a sea change moment. I think now the activist left, which the hardcore activist left was by and large happy that Kirk died. That doesn't describe everyone who votes Democratic. That said, I think those people now are a bit more careful about what they say in terms of condoning violence. However, I just did a discussion with Patrick Basham, head of the Democracy Institute. He's the only pollster who got Brexit and Trump's 2016 victory correct. And what he found in his latest survey was that there is on both sides a rise in tolerance for political violence, but it's more seen on the left than the right. Though there's a higher proportion of the left that is in favor of political violence than you find on the right. I do think that a lot of these people on the left getting canceled for saying what they said about Charlie Kirk, being glad about his public assassination. I don't think it'll make their politics more moderate, but I do think perhaps it will make them less likely to lionize violence in the public square. And that is, the absence of that lionization is definitely a good thing. But we are in a time of increased normalization and glorification of political violence. Definitely not anything that is in any respect good for America. But it is interesting to see that it is more seen on the left than the right, even though it has risen on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, I concur, and I think that still normal Americans are enough in the majority to condemn any form of political violence, right? But at the same time, we need to be wary of these extremists going underground. The far left, for instance, and their love of these elements within the left or the far left that were cheerful for Charlie Kirk's death, them possibly going underground and trying to hide their agenda. And same with elements of the far right. The same. Like, again, hypothetical scenario of like a Hassan Piker or anybody like that. But it makes me, it's moments like that make me feel glad to be an American, that we have Americans, both left and right, liberal and conservative, that still appreciate our culture for free speech, appreciate our culture for not wanting one's political opponents to die like that, despite the degree of partisanship that we've been in now for the last 10 years. Extreme partisanship.
It is extreme, and I think it'll only intensify. But, I wrote an article after Kirk was assassinated saying that his assassination ends the debate. And that doesn't mean that people aren't going to hear different sides of the aisle. I spend most of my day when I have time reading different perspectives that are often wildly out of sync with my own. But I do want to try to get the whole story. All the same, I think when I said that his assassination ended the debate, and it also became an episode of News Site, what I meant was that these old school debates that have long history in the Anglo-American tradition, started in the UK, obviously exported to the US. These debates, I don't think, are going to be had much anymore. And I don't even think they're necessarily advisable, because they are very dangerous. And in this age of political violence, I'm not going to say these debates invite violence, because, a debate is not an invitation to violence. But what I will say is that it's far less feasible to do this stuff safely. And I would never encourage people to do something that I believe is unsafe for them and perhaps for other people who might get caught in the crossfire. So I think that his debate was, there's no question his death was a cultural touchstone, but I think that his debating methodology, and I'm not talking about the manner in which he debated, but I'm talking about him doing these old school public debates, so on and so forth. I do think that's falling by the wayside now. It's just more dangerous, and people have less of an appetite for it. Any thoughts on that, Tom?
Yeah, I think it's mostly a shame, but I hopefully I hope that that's not going to be permanent. So, for instance, I used to like the guy. He's also been taking a theocratic groyperish turn. Steven Crowder, for instance, Steven Crowder. I used to like him when I was like a kid in college, years ago. For the record, literally was a mug club kind of guy. Because I liked his free speech campus stuff. He recently restarted his Change My Mind events after Charlie Kirk's assassination. And one of the cool things that he ended up doing is not only did he have increased security, but also in front of the tent, the Change My Mind kind of tent that you saw Charlie Kirk have or whatever, when Steven Crowder had his tent, he added a layer of bulletproof glass in front, very similar to like, it was in the 80s or 90s when there were assassination attempts against the Pope. They ended up just putting the Pope in a glass van or whatever glass, vehicle with bulletproof glass. I'm fine with that. I want these debates and I want these Change My Mind events on campuses to continue. Does that mean that certain national organizations and think tanks then need to provide their chapters with certain things to help protect them? Fine. But I don't want that to be the end of these events whatsoever. I don't want speakers who go to campuses on the right or the left to cave to fear because of what happened to Charlie Kirk. And I'm very glad that some are not caving in. So Peter Boghossian, who's also another advisor to Atheists for Liberty, he runs an org called the National Progress Alliance. He's offered to waive his speaking fee to go on campuses around the country. And the same has been happening with a lot of other culture war type figures that they've decided to not back down. So I appreciate that. You might have to up your budgets. You might have to get some bulletproof glass. You might have to get some Kevlar, whatever you got to do. But I don't want this to be the end of Change My Mind type things. We've been engaging in them as well in our series called Impossible Conversations. We went to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville before having Destiny at our campus back in May. Originally to debate Andrew Wilson, but ended up just turning into a Destiny Q&A thing. We engaged for hours and hours and hours on it in a kind of change our mind type environment where we were debating Christians, where we were debating far leftists and woke types and Islamic apologists in that spirit of debate, in that spirit of conversation, like college campuses should be. So I hope that's not the end. I luckily don't think it's going to be the end because I think people are adapting, parent groups and national orgs are going to adapt to help their chapters. Let's have that stay permanent. Let's have that adaptation stay permanent and not have any halting to the continuance of these free speech events. And I hope that sticks. I hope that remains. I hope people don't cave into fear.
It's very, very sad that to just give a speech devoted to hearing different points of view, which is, it's a speech in part, but it's also a discussion forum. People would have to hide behind bulletproof glass. I'll say hide behind any cowardice. That's not what I meant. But the fact that people would have to sit or stand behind bulletproof glass is a horrible thing. And, it's not only not cowardly, it's what they should do if they're going to do something like that, which nowadays I perceive to be profoundly dangerous. I would think that the natural home for these debates going forward, to the extent these debates still happen, because less and less people are interested in these debates, because society is more polarized and people can less handle different opinions, unfortunately, which causes a whole host of problems in and of itself. But that's another story. But I think that the natural home for debates today is probably through video conferencing across the internet and then live streaming it, which would seem to be the safest option.
Yeah, if you have to go in that direction, I think that's better than nothing, right? So, for a lot of people that can't make it onto a campus, make it into, actually debating in person, right? For the last over 10 plus years, we've already started to normalize Zoom, Google Meet, Skype. Skype is dead now, but like you get my point. Like we're chatting on StreamYard, right? We're not in person, but we're still conversing. So there's ways where you could still have debates, conversations, and their entire debate channels, people's careers, people's ways of making money that have existed based on online debates existing. We're going to be doing the same thing at Atheists for Liberty, by the way, everybody. I have an AI camera. That's why it's moving back and forth. And we're going to be doing the same thing at Atheists for Liberty. So and we're doing in-person events. For example, I'll do a pitch in late November, early December. We're solidifying the dates. We're going to release more information soon. We are going to be doing another on-campus, in-person debate event at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, with two very big speakers. So that's going to be happening. We're also doing more debates online, both via our Discord server, with our collaboration with the Politics Discord server, and also on YouTube. And in other places like X, we'll be streaming it to multiple platforms. So there are alternate ways where you can do debates, have debates. Let's keep that going. Let's keep that culture going. Let's not shut up. That's the way to honor people that have died in the name of free speech, to keep the conversation going no matter who tries to shut you up.
Now, I was going to say, I mean, there are a lot of things to say, but unfortunately we're pressed for time. But I was going to say about Charlie Kirk, definitely very strongly believed in free speech. That was a constant across his life. And he believed in hearing out the other side and presenting a forceful but respectful argument to that side. However, he did change on religion. He was always a Christian. But in 2018, he told Dave Rubin that he strongly supported the separation between church and state, and that arguments such as what were had at Turning Point had to be framed and disseminated in a secular fashion. But then during COVID, there was this pivot, which was shocking to say the least, toward explicit religion-based politicking. And then he formed, as you mentioned, Turning Point Faith. And then in the aftermath of COVID, he was going around, or even I think during the last leg of COVID, before the aftermath, he was going around talking about essentially church and state being integrated because it's a myth that they should be separated. And I believe he also bought into the Seven Mountains doctrine, which is a little complicated, but it holds that
all due to the Groyper Wars, by the way. All due to the Groyper Wars.
Yeah, so let's discuss exactly how this stuff came about, because it was, I broadly supported his work before that. I still think he was a great guy. But the fact of the matter is this theocracy thing cannot be overlooked because it was very bad. And you're about to explain why it happened, but people just have to understand that it did happen. And one of the reasons why I waited a few weeks to talk to Tom about this is because in the aftermath, immediately it would have been too emotional, not with him, but with audience members, with people generally. But now, since a bit of time has passed, we can discuss these things in a way that I think people can more reasonably understand. But anyway, Tom, please go ahead.
Yeah, so fall 2019, there was a cultural event in American history called the Groyper Wars. Nick Fuentes, host of his show America First, he essentially had hundreds in person of his thousands of supporters online go to Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk speaking events, Ben Shapiro events, Steven Crowder events, Michael Knowles events, Klavan events, like these kind of, in-person college campusy culture war events. They didn't like that Turning Point USA was becoming more classically liberal, secular, kind of old school Democrat in terms of being okay with things like gay marriage, separation of church and state, things like that, while still having the widest tent possible and opposing a very dogmatic far left that was rising in this social justice hierarchy. Nick Fuentes got his people to say, well, wait a second, Charlie, wait a second, Ben, wait a second, Stephen, wait a second, guys. We're meant to be the big time Christians that are meant to enforce morality or enforce our vision of morality upon people. Wait a second. Why are you sitting next to a black gay guy? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? They pointed to a hypocrisy that existed on the right where they were going in a secular direction, but they were still caving to baby boomer religious right donors and still trying to look very pious and religious. Our enemies took advantage of that. Our far right enemies like the Groypers, they took advantage of that. And so began an event publicly and then privately via infiltration in various different think tanks, political party groups, college Republicans, Young Americans for Liberty, Turning Point USA, YAL, YAF, all, PragerU. This was known as the Groyper Wars. And their main target was Charlie Kirk. Their main target was Turning Point USA in his Culture War Fall 2019 tour. This is what made Nick Fuentes blow up and become very, very famous in right-wing politics. And through that, he also got to grow his brand of white identity, white nationalism, his disdain for Jews, and his disdain for Israel. But forget even the Israel debate. His disdain for Jews and Jews in politics, etc. The whole topic of Jews and Judaism, and a wide variety of other topics where, with his persistence, with his Groyper supporters, that's what they're called, supporters of Nick Fuentes, their goals are to infiltrate the institutions. And then when you infiltrate the institutions, you then also change the culture. They did this with Turning Point. So Turning Point Faith came out in 2021. Why? It came out in 2021 because due to internal pressure from the Groypers when they weren't even admitting that they were Groypers at the time internally within Turning Point. And you had Groyper leaders and enemies of mine admit even on their own shows in 2021 that the creation of Turning Point Faith was due to the Groyper Wars. I'll concede, we should concede and show that our enemies are powerful in doing this. The problem that existed in the conservative movement back then was everyone thought, you want to get rid of Nick Fuentes? Don't talk about him. You want to get rid of the Groypers? Don't talk about the Groypers. Don't mention the Groypers. Don't invite them onto your shows to debate them.
That was my point of view exactly. I'm just going to say, just
and I think that was a mistake. I think that was a mistake. I think we should have acknowledged them and we should have combated them. And I think if we did that without being scared of them, they took advantage of the fact that people on our side were scared, and it made people investigate them and make them look like martyrs when we should have taken them on and destroyed their ideas. We should have shown people what jokes of theocrats and authoritarians they were. And I think that's why some people ended up respecting the militant atheists that were against them, because we were honest in being willing to do so, despite other anti-woke advisors and others. Not you, by the way. Not Joseph Cotto, by the way. This is pre-Joseph Cotto, telling us, oh, don't talk about them. Don't talk about them. Nick Fuentes was so fascinated that I was willing to give a comprehensive historical analysis to people on their podcast about how dangerous the Groypers were, that the Groypers were fascinated by Atheists for Liberty. And they tried to infiltrate us when our Discord server at the time was members only. We should be honest. And the more honest and the more brutally honest we are in combating religion and combating these theocrats for what they are, the more we'll win. These people win because they feel like they can get away with anything, saying anything they want, while everybody is hiding behind the political correctness of a microphone. That's why Charlie Kirk wasn't ultimately able to defeat them, even though he banned them from a lot of their events and stuff like that, which I am not opposed to, but acknowledge the names, acknowledge the labels, acknowledge the war campaign against them. And if they did that, I think Nick Fuentes wouldn't be as powerful as he is currently today.